Okay, thank you for being with us today. This is our last day at Tactical Edge Virtual Summit. It's Friday. How are you, Ed? How are you this morning?
Relieved. Relieved, I think that's the word. Last day, it's been hectic 4 or 5 days, but my God, it's been unreal learning. I tell you, I'm in a project right now where there's going to be a new season starting there, and I'm going to be working with her and her group to help her come up to speed and get everything. So listening to Michael Ball's presentation yesterday about a virtual CISO with 30, 60, 90 days, listening to Wendy, listening to Andy, listening to Tony Cole, to Stephen Moore from Exabeam on Tuesday. A lot of really, really good stuff. And man, it's been fantastic. Me has been fantastic. And today, well, is the last day. And as usual, it seems that we have issues here. 1 second. Let me just
Actually,
make sure.
Today we can say it's Fantastic Friday.
Fantastic Friday. And that's right. Looking forward to it. So we have our first, before we start with our guests, actually, I want to say thank you so much to our wonderful sponsors, Ativo Networks, SailPoint, Exabeam, and CyberArk. They've been fantastic. And they're the reason why, all this work that we've done during the past, 3 months, 4 months, putting this together, and then, having this wonderful platform and being able to offer all of this information, which is basically free information, free training and everything. It's all thanks to them. So again, thank you to Ativo Networks, SailPoint, Exabeam, and CyberArk. Really appreciate the help. So Salma, who do we have with us today?
Yes, well, today our next speaker is not just a legend, but a legend that inspires legends. An international acclaimed, award-winning information security professional, a man who will not only convince you to change your password, but also your religious beliefs. Mike Tyson referred to him as the baddest man in information security today. A man who worked his way up from security operations before becoming a consultant, an industry analyst of 451 Research, and now the best-looking security advocate at KnowBe4. The man who invented the autophoto. Autophoto. Please give a warm welcome to Mr. Javvad Malik.
Yeah.
Welcome. That was such a nice introduction, Selma. It's almost as if you read the inside of my inner dialogue out loud.
Well, I'm glad you like it.
So,
how are
Javvad,
you?
I had the pleasure of hosting Javvad in Bogota. Javad's been to Bogota as well, Salma. So he's one of the 4 guests today. 3 of them have been with me to Colombia. Javvad is one of them, and that's where he coined the phrase "auto photo." And auto photo. That was the funniest thing. What was the whole thing you were looking to do?
About that story. What happened? Why auto photo?
So no, this isn't. I didn't do it. It was
Crazy. InfoSec Sherpa.
InfoSec Sherpa. Yes. So she was handling the official Tactical Edge Twitter handle. So I said to her, tweet out after my talk, if you want a selfie with me, they'll cost $5. So she wanted it to send it out in English and then also in Spanish. So she ran it through Google Translate. And Google Translate translated selfie as auto photo.
Auto photo.
Oh my God.
So that's how it went out. And everyone's like, what the hell is an auto photo? Why would I pay this man $5 for one? So
I remember Tracy asked me like, Ed, how do you say selfie in Spanish? And I'm like, is that a trick question? Selfie.
Selfie.
It's like, oh, you don't say auto photo? I'm like, what the hell is an auto photo? That is so funny.
That's a good one. That's a good
Anyway.
story. Oh, you have another story, another one that someone recognized you, a fan, a big fan, and asked you a picture or
In Bogota, of all places.
in Bogota. Tell us that story.
Well, that's I don't know. This happens to me so often that I lose track of how many times it happens. But I go out around the world, and because of my YouTube video and my extensive speaking experience, I get mobbed by people. I get in the car, I have to turn on the wipers to get people off the windscreen so I can see where I'm going. But anyway, I'm in Bogota one morning having breakfast with Ed and a couple of other people, and someone comes up to Ed and he goes, "Hey, is that Javvad?" And he's like, "Yeah." He goes, "Oh man, I've seen it on YouTube. Do you think I could get a selfie with him?" And so that really made my whole week. That made the whole trip worth it for me, because I came home and I was telling my family, even now, I said, "You have no idea what a big deal I am. Like, I go around the world and people they recognize me, and you guys don't give me any respect in the household. You're like, do this, do that." I said, "Look, I'm a big deal, so start treating me with a bit of respect."
Great.
That's fantastic.
Very nice. Very
So,
nice.
yeah.
Okay. And today, what is your presentation about?
My presentation is about how you can fix the defender's dilemma with one simple trick. It's okay. It's a bit of a clickbait title, but it's really, as defenders, we have many challenges. But you know, how do you improve it? And I tweeted a little video clip of the Colombian goalkeeper the other day when he did that scorpion kick against England. And I think he was just such a great character. I remember growing up and seeing him like run out into the middle of the pitch and going to the end and actually scoring goals as well. So I thought, you know, that's really how I perceive a defender to be. Like, okay, you're the goalkeeper, you're in charge of the goal, but you can go out there and you can make magic happen as well. So that's kind of like my inspiration behind the title of the talk, and that's what it's about.
Great. Fantastic. And we are in Fantastic Friday, so the stage is yours. Welcome again to Tactical Edge.
Thank you.
Hello, Tactical Edge. Thank you so much for having me. I am Javvad Malik. It's an absolute pleasure. I had the pleasure of speaking at Tactical Edge in Bogota about 3 years ago, and I was very much looking forward to being there in person again. But due to travel restrictions and all the things going on in the world, we'll have to do this remotely. So let's dive right into it. Fixing the defender's dilemma with one simple trick. If this is not the session you're here for, then find the one that you are meant to be in. So, about me, I'm Javvad Malik. I think most people know me from YouTube more than my security work, but yeah, if you've seen any videos on the CISP or the music videos, then yeah, that's me. If not, then you can, I suppose, Google me afterwards. You can look me up. But yeah, I worked for KnowBe4, security awareness and training provider. There's all the information. You can look them up afterwards if you really want to. So today's presentation, we are going to be trying to understand the defender's dilemma. We will look at some expert opinions, take data for a drive, look at some smoke mirrors that are out there, and then some conclusions. And I've put parting words, standing ovation, lots of cheering, selfies and autographs. And a funny thing happened that when I was here last time, there was the official Twitter account, and so I said, "Oh, you know, it's $5 for a selfie with me afterwards," and we done a quick Google Translate so that it's localized, and selfie was translated as auto photo. So it went out as, if you want an auto photo with me, then please see me afterwards, and at the cost of $5. And Ed forever now has me as the auto photo guy. So yeah, if you want your auto photos, see me afterwards. So how do we understand the defender's dilemma? And you know, there are many challenges that as defenders within organizations, security professionals face. First and foremost, I think money is the key aspect that, you know, plagues everyone, every organization. There's never enough money around, is there? You don't have money to hire the best staff, to retain staff, to implement improvements, or to indeed buy the next shiny product that you need. There's also a lot of competing for resources internally, and the security team, you have your own priorities. The DevOps team has their own ones. Operations wants something else. The CIO wants to roll out new laptops to everyone, or what have you. So there's always some competition for resources and new products that the company wants to release. And then secondly, I think organizations as a whole, businesses as a whole, they often have too many top priorities. Whichever project you go in, every project manager or program manager will say, well, their one's the most important and it needs to go live at a drop dead date and no one's going to stop them, especially not security. And often we're left with this kind of thing, and I stole this from a slide about patching, but I thought it reflects the defender's dilemma quite well. Is that you have all the potential threats in the world, which is the blue one, all the way down to the red. So focus your resources here, and then here, and then here, and then if you have time, which no one ever has, you can then go out and try to fix every potential threat in the world. And this is what we find a lot of security professionals in this position, like, well, that's fine. And I completely agree with this. It's how we should approach it, but that's the theoretical model. In reality, we often have incomplete data. We just don't know what data we need to make an informed decision, or we don't have it. And at the same time, while we have incomplete data, we do have a lot of information overload. So, we often just don't know what data is useful or not. So there's a lot of data there, and, how do we make that all usable? And I think, wandering the shows of floors of trade shows, and this is something that, hopefully we'll get back to doing again. But, you go to any trade show floor and you'll see a ton of vendors there, hundreds and hundreds of vendors. And everyone will tell you that this is the biggest problem that your organization faces, and here's how this solution can help, and therefore buy my product. But what there is that there's this perception reality gap. There's a gap between the threats that you're being told about and the actual threats that are relevant to your organization. So as a result of all these things, I think most companies are inefficient defenders. They don't say they're bad defenders. They're not saying they're not trying the best. I just think that there's a lot of wasted resource in some places, a lot of friction. There's so the efficiencies aren't there. And I think three of the key aspects to that are: one is not understanding the threats and risks as well as they think they do. And this might feel like a personal attack, but I've reflected on this a lot, and even when I was working in industry, I think it applies true. And I speak to a lot of friends who still work in end user organizations, and this comes true because the security team often has their own definition of what they believe the risk appetite of the organization is, which doesn't necessarily always marry up with everyone. I think a good test is to ask a bunch of stakeholders, what is your number one threat to the organization? And I don't think there are many companies that will come back saying with a unified response. There's a lack of communication at all levels, and there's spend on the wrong defenses. So that's your question. What is your number one security threat? So in your mind, think about what you believe for your organization is the number one security threat. Now ask that question, even if it's in your mind, not quite yet, wait until I finish my presentation, but then go and ask people in your organization, what's your number one security threat? And see whether they come up with the same answer. So, the two questions are, the 2 points are one is, what do you want to spend your budget on? And number 2 is how to be effective defenders. So when I say, what do you want to spend your budget on? It's things like avoiding shelfware. And shelfware is like, well, you buy something and then you never really use it. I mean, how many of you have ever been involved in this security rollout of, say, a SIM or a privileged identity management thing? Or, I mean, these are personal examples to me where you spent millions, you've spent, lots of resource on it, taken 18 months, you've rolled it out, and then it's never really worked out. So you just leave it ticking in the corner, or, when the auditor comes and you show them what it is, and they'll be happy. And the second thing is, how do you become more effective defenders, and or efficient even, and that's to be confident even when you're breached, because we're not there to stop every breach, but we want to be confident that we know when a breach occurs, we can take the remedial action and we can minimize the impact. So I went out and I asked a bunch of security professionals, these fine group. I know they might look like a lineup, a police lineup, but no, trust me, these are all respected security professionals in the world. And I asked them, a simple question. I said, business, there's a business with an online presence. So it has a website, transacts some data, payments, and it says, we take security seriously. I'm sure a lot of you have heard that. Normally when a company gets breached, they'll release a statement saying, we've been breached, but rest assured, we take your security seriously. So as a security expert, what would it take for you to believe that statement? And this is a good exercise, a mental exercise again. It's like, maybe take a second to think about, if a company says, we take security seriously, what does it mean to you? Or how would they prove it to you? So there wasn't a simple answer. I got a variety of different answers. So, for example, Haroon may have said, people need to realize that customer data is like a kind of toxic asset. A company that wants me to transact needs to signal that they understand this. A toxic asset, it's a bit like, I would say, maybe radioactive material. So, it's toxic, it's dangerous to you, but, if you handle it correctly, then it's fine. X-rays, in small doses, if you just go for your one X-ray, it's safe for you. But if you're the doctor or the practitioner who's doing the radiographer, you have to go behind a shield because you don't want to be continually exposed to those things. So the question is, does a company treat customer data in the same way? Steve Lord, he said, no one wants to be known for having Equifax grade security, not even Equifax. And Casey Ellis says, one can never know how seriously a company takes security. So it comes down to relying on proxy indicators of security maturity. So that's like looking at all the indicators, the signs that say that, something is secure. One of these people have not been media trained. I'll leave you to guess which one's which. So as a result of all the conversations with all the professionals, I sort of whittled it down and consolidated them, normalized them into a set of controls. So there are things like this, many people said the strength and credibility of security teams, how well they, whether security is in the annual financial reports, how good their incident response is, whether they have a bug bounty, transparency, all those kinds of things. And then I counted the number of times each one of those controls was mentioned. So number one, and I think it's no surprise, the most mentioned one was website infrastructure. So a website is the front page, the front door to any organization. You just go, you can go there and you can say, do they have TLS set up? What are their password policies? Do they offer me multi-factor authentication? Do blah blah? Do they have a privacy policy? All those kinds of things. And then there's a whole bunch of things that come in quite close. So incident response, being certified to something like ISO 27001, the strength and credibility of the security team, 2FA was mentioned many times, and you can see there's all these things that are mentioned there. So the next thing I'd done, I said, well, having controls is one thing. We're very good as an industry in coming up with controls. Oh, you should do this. If you want that to happen, you should do that. But the question is like, well, how easy are these controls to implement? So I took to Twitter and LinkedIn and I asked security professionals, like, well, here are some controls. How easy do you think they are to implement? So for example, I asked incident response. It's one of those important controls that our security professionals mentioned, but in reality, more than half of security pros, they say it's very hard. It's very hard. There's I've lost my train of thoughts, but the majority say it's either needs some effort or quite hard or very hard. Only the small minority said it's easy or somewhat easy. 2FA, we've got a real mixture of responses. Some people saying it's quite easy to do, and others saying it's quite hard to do. And so I dug into this and I asked people, well, why is that? And again, it just depends on the infrastructure that you're running. If you have a lot of legacy systems and you're a very traditional organization, then maybe rolling out something like this is a big project. But if you're like, say, a new organization and you've got everything in the cloud, you're a Microsoft shop or something, then rolling out 2FA is just as simple as clicking a button and off you go. Monitoring, again, there's some variety there. So there's no real consistency, but I took the bulk of it and I thought, okay, how often were each of those controls mentioned? And how easy are they to implement? So what we found is that tech blogs, for example, so I'll talk you through this, 1 being easiest and 5 being most difficult along the y-axis. So tech blogs come up here. So they're relatively easy to implement. And the number of times they were mentioned is along here. So they're mentioned by about three of the security professionals who we interviewed. Website infrastructure mentioned a lot of times, and a lot of people think it's relatively easy thing to sort out. If you come further down, incident response is mentioned quite a few times, like 5 times over here, but it's quite difficult to implement. Then there are all these ones that in red. This is just my estimation because it was very difficult to word this in a meaningful way to ask in a poll. But something like putting security into financial reports is actually quite a hard thing to do because you're talking about mainly public companies and what have you. Having a security team, it's quite important. It's mentioned several times, but is it easy to build a very big and credible security team? Well, maybe if you're Wendy Nather, yes, but for everyone else, then that's quite a difficult thing to do. So if you're thinking about what to implement in terms of security, then start at the top right and then work your way down, because those are the top right will give you your wins with the big impact. The top left will give you quick wins, but maybe not necessarily a big impact, but they're quick wins. The bottom left are ones that maybe you accept the risk on that, or you move on, or you put in place a longer program for that. So taking what we know about these things, I went out and say, well, let's have a look at some of these common websites and see how well they rank up against our security controls. So against website infrastructure, password, 2FA, compliance, tech blogs, transparency, bug bounty, and monitoring. And against Google, Facebook, MailChimp, Yahoo, and Netflix. So Google, yeah, they were actually good on all of these things. Facebook, they were also good. MailChimp, they get extra points for 2FA because they actually offer a discount on paid plans if you enable 2FA. Yahoo comes up with everything. And Netflix actually scores poorly on password and 2FA because they just don't offer 2FA and their passwords can be really simple and short. But their tech blogs are absolutely fantastic. They offer some tools, and it's a very, very good resource of information. And then I looked at this and I thought, well, Yahoo, it ticks all the boxes that we talked about, but how many of you actually look at Yahoo and say, oh, that's a very trustworthy company, that's very secure? They maybe they are today, but I don't know, maybe I'm hung up on history, but I thought, well, maybe when we look at, so when we as security professionals, we look at controls, we look at them through this particular lens, and we kind of like maybe don't see everything how it should be. And that's where I thought maybe there's a spurious correlation. And this is a website called tylervision.com. And what it does is it takes two data points which correlate with each other, but for absolutely no reason whatsoever. So in this chart, you'll see that the number of films that Nicolas Cage appears in correlates almost precisely with the number of people who drowned by falling into a pool. So if you're just looking at this in isolation, you're like, well, yes, if Nicolas Cage doesn't release any movies, people won't die by drowning in a pool. Of course, we know there's no actual correlation, but the charts make it appear so. So as security professionals, sometimes I think we fall into this trap of spurious correlations, where we look at either breaches, or we look at certain controls, or we look at certain indicators and correlate that to good or bad security. And that may or may not be actually true in all cases. So I think the answer is, or the magic trick is, you take a more data-driven approach. And this is something that I think a lot of companies could benefit from. So the traditional approach to sort of security risks are like this. And this again goes back to wandering the floors of a trade show. Every vendor over there, if you imagine, someone's going to say espionage, your biggest insider threat, weak passwords, mobile, leaked. They're going to say all of these things are your biggest threat. And all these threats are presented in this similar way. And so what a lot of organizations end up doing is like, well, we're worried about everything, so let's just sprinkle a bit of defenses here, there, and everywhere, and we need to have a defense in depth, which is good, but this looks like a lot like expense in depth. So what we end up doing, we spread a lot of controls around. It's multi-million-dollar budgets over many years, and each defense is treated equally. Now, the problem with that is disproportionate to the actual threat that the organization is facing. So what's the solution? It's very simple. We look at the root cause of these attacks. And when you look at the root cause, you can then come up with a more contextual way of looking at the threats that your organization faces. So by a root cause, I mean the thing that actually allows the bad guy to get in. So for example, if your account is compromised, if there's account compromise as an issue, there are many different ways that account can be compromised. So it could be weak password spraying, password credential stuffing, lack of 2FA, lack of this, lack of that, whatever. But ultimately, the root cause is, well, you just use a static password. So if you just look at all of those issues as covered by one root cause, weak credentials, then it becomes easy, like, okay, how do we bolster our credentials? And that will protect you against a whole plethora of issues. For example, if you look at a lot of ransomware, how that gets in, or other malware, or business email compromise, a lot of these all come in through phishing. Or spear phishing routes. So if you just focus on that one route, then you would have blocked a majority of the threats that are out there. So this helps you rate your threats accordingly, and therefore you can apply your defenses accordingly. So what the focus is that you're actually mitigating the root causes, not the individual threats, and this becomes a far more efficient resource utilization of your resource, and it makes your cost benefit analysis a lot easier. So I took this and I thought, okay, let's apply this model to 100 different threat intelligence reports. And to do that, I went to OTX. OTX is Open Threat Exchange. It's otx.alienvault.com. It's kind of like Twitter, but for threat intelligence. And this is how it's presented there. This is what it looks like. There's a whole list of new threats, and this is collated from all sorts of different vendors. So it's not just AlienVault or AT&T as they are now, but it's not just theirs, but it's collected from every single other vendor out there that publicly produces threat intel. So when you click into one of these, this is what shows up. There's a whole bunch of indicators of compromise, and then there's a link to the blog at the top. So the indicators of compromise are there so that you can import them into your SIEM or whatever threat detection tool, and you can look for those indicators in your environment. But I wasn't interested in that. I was interested in going to the actually, if I go back again here. So over here, the reference. So this is a Fortinet produced analysis. So if you click through on that will take you to Fortinet's page, where they've got a detailed technical breakdown of what that threat or that threat actor is doing, what the campaign is, and everything. So I've done this for 100 different reports from different vendors, and I went through and these are all the different vendors that were included in it. So you can see there's Arn Lab all the way to ZDNet. Twitter's in there because a lot of researchers post their findings on Twitter, but there's a whole bunch of vendors on there. So this was to remove any of my personal bias as well. So I went through all of these reports by these different vendors, 100 of them in total, and upon reading them, I don't know how many of you actually read these vendor threat intel reports, but some of them are really well written, but a lot of them I took a long time to understand what they were talking about. So get to the point quicker. If you're one of those authors, read the pyramid principle, which helps you get to the point a lot quicker as a writer. Anyway, the results. What did those 100 threat intelligence reports say? Well, they said the initial access vector, and that's what I was after. So this is like an example. So this shows, the highlighted part shows what I was looking for. And this is another example: initial access vector, attachment from an email. So this is what I was pulling out from all the reports. And as you can see, like spear phishing was by far the most common way. There was like other issues there, but that was the most common way there. The objectives were a bit unknown overall, but ransomware was. So I mean, when you look at it, actually you split down into two things. There's either financial gain or intellectual property or nation state kind of thing. So those are the two broad categories these break into. So what you have is the initial breach root cause for most companies, according to the 100 threat intel reports, is social engineering forms the number one root, unpatched software number two, and supply chain, or your third party, your vendor management, is the third way that a lot of these actors will get into your organization. I have to caveat though that this is only looking at those 100 threat intelligence reports. So these are looking at a lot of the known big actors and their campaigns. This doesn't cover thing that's relevant to your organization, and it certainly doesn't cover those opportunistic or low-level hackers or less than organized criminal gangs. Because when you add in all of that data, you'll probably get, you might get some things changing around. So, for example, credential compromise is not here because that's not really well, I suppose maybe they could, but nation states or large organized criminal gangs, they're not really looking at, password spraying techniques to try and break in. But that is a very, very common threat. So look at what your threat is using your own data, and then apply this model. Don't just say, hey, Javvad said these three are the top 3 threats in the world. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying according to those 100 reports, this is what I pulled out of it. Your experiences may vary. So what this approach will give you is an increased focus on the right things and a defensible strategy. And the caveat is there again, you need to supplement this external data with your own. And I think that really is the key thing. All these approaches really work best when you apply them to your own data, to your own experience. So if you have your own logs from incidents and what the attack vectors are, what's specific to your organization, that's what's going to help you the most. Otherwise, every vendor or all these reports that are out there, they'll be talking in very broad terms, general terms, or maybe even disingenuous to serve their own purposes. So, what are your top root causes? And one of my colleagues, Roger Grimes, me and him discussed this a lot. And these are kind of like the top 10 things that we agree on as the root causes. I mean, literally, I think you can boil down a lot of security down into these 10 root causes. And if you can eliminate these, then you've pretty much eliminated nearly every security issue there is out there that faces your organization, nearly. If you actually think there's something that's missing here or doesn't fit into one of those categories, please do drop me a line afterwards. I'd be very interested to have a discussion, because me and Roger have spoken about this a while, and he's convinced me that these are the right ones. So I'm going with him, but I'm happy to have my mind changed. But for example, if we hear every week almost that, there's an S3 bucket that's been misconfigured and left open. That's misconfiguration. When human error occurs, when insiders, when there's reliance issues, physical attacks. So all of these things, I think, if you work it down, you can probably narrow these down as well even further and say, well, for your organization, actually, these three are the biggest issues. So let's focus on authentication attacks. Let's bolster the authentication side. Or, maybe there's some programming bugs, so let's start patching stuff, or let's do more code analysis. This is kind of like what the cycle looks like, or data-driven defense. Collect. If you start at the top, it's really important to collect your local threat intel. This is your own local internal information. No company, especially if you're sitting there in Colombia, you can't expect a company based in North America or in Europe somewhere or in Asia to be able to give you threat intel that applies to your organization. You have to find that out for yourself. And then rank those risks, just rank them appropriately. Create a comms plan. So this is kind of like these two steps are key for your internal stakeholders. Then define and collect the metrics. And once you have that, then select and deploy your root cause defenses. That's going back to those lists of 10 defenses that we had earlier. And then review and improve as you do. And because we're security, we go back to the beginning, because we want everything to go in a cycle, because that keeps us employed. But joking aside, this is so important, because this is how we will actually keep an eye on it and if we're collecting the right metrics, we should be able to see a drop in the number of successful attacks. So, this brings me to another interesting point, just around metrics and how we position things within security. Is what we as an industry, there are lots of smokes and mirrors, I suppose, smoke and mirrors in there. So if we go back to the question of who takes security seriously? It's not like we take security seriously as an organization, but who takes security seriously? I mean, if you ask me, I'll say, yes, I take security seriously. I'm sure you say you do. The CISO, maybe auditors. I don't know who takes security seriously. So there's something I think that needs to be called out is the audit cycle. And what I call this is an auditor comes in, they find something useless, and then you have to convince the auditor that it's useless, or you have to do something to convince them that you fixed it. This is why many years ago, a friend of mine shared this with me, this photo. It's from a real audit box, but I'm sure some of you might have seen similar instances of an audit box, which is basically a box of pre-prepared documentation. So when an auditor comes in and says, I need to audit your network or your systems, you say, well, here's the box. Here's all of our documentation. Here's our network diagram. Here's our user list, here's how procedures for how we manage privileged passwords. And the reality may or may not reflect what's in the box, but this is what will get you through the auditor. So now the auditor comes in, finds some useless findings. You deceive them by throwing them an audit box. And then what you want to be careful of is you don't throw them everything. You throw in some scraps in there. You deliberately leave some mistakes in there that they can find. And then they report that as a useless finding, and then you fix it. You say, oh, good catch, Mr. Auditor, Mrs. Auditor, we've now fixed it. And that continues. I'd like to say that I take security seriously, but, and I do, but I suppose mistakes happen. And that's one of the key things as well. There's a time that I was trying to configure some permissions. I was working at a bank and I took down online banking. And these mistakes happen, but I think what's important is, well, obviously people make mistakes, but having the right controls and processes and the culture in place that, people aren't inclined to make changes in production, for example, or pushing changes without having them checked by somebody else. And these are the things that I think will really help. They'll help grease the wheels in terms of your data-driven approach. It's all well and good saying that this is what the data says, and here's how we can massage it, and here's how we can say that we've deployed some root cause defenses. But until you actually embed that culture of security throughout the organization, it's going to be very hard to push that through. So in summary, I think as organizations, we need to get far, far better at managing risk. We need to manage risk with a data-driven security strategy. And again, I'll reiterate, this is all about, having data that is relevant to your organizations, information that you've collected yourself, and use that information then to figure out what your top root causes are and what your threats are. And then gain assurance, assess how well your defenses align to those threats. And I think, it's such a simple process when you say it out loud, but this really is the one simple trick, I think, that will help the defenders. I think if we started applying this as a whole, we would get far better or be more efficient in our approaches. Yep, I suppose, final word is you're not going to stop everything. I don't think that's a big issue. I don't think we're under the illusion that we are. But, let your data tell the story. Win people's trust, win your stakeholders' trust. And hopefully everyone will be happy with you, carry you on their shoulders and cheer your name. At least that's what I'm hoping for. That will happen in my career. So we'll leave it at that. So with that, I would like to thank you for your time, and let me just get back to... With that, I'd like to thank you for your time. I've lost my other camera. I was trying to switch it back to me.
Okay. Thank you.
Wait, hold on. I messed up. Sorry, Javvad. I thought you were done there. You threw me for a loop.
That's all right. No worries. No worries. I was using this software and I couldn't get it back to me, so it's all right. No worries.
And that's what I thought, that you were talking to me live. I was like, oh, damn, he's already on. Let me go back. So I apologize. But anyway, the presentation will be available later today. I got to tell you, man, I laughed so hard. Obviously, I was sharing my screen and I wasn't sure if I mute my microphone, if I would also mute the transmission. So I had to be really quiet. I left my mic on. And I had to laugh in silence. You know how that difficult it is to do to a Java session, a Javvad session. It's incredible. I have a couple of questions here. Question for Javvad from, I don't know, this lady, Wendy Nather. She keeps following you and I don't know. I have no idea who she is. Anyway, she's like, why don't you just cut to the chase and say that MFA will solve most of your root cause problems?
Yeah, so I think if you're looking, definitely, if you're looking at, so we come up with a 10, kind of almost 10-ish root causes.
Yeah.
And I think that's what it boils down to. When you look at authentication as a root cause that people get in, and there are many symptoms for it, there are many manifestations of it. So it could be like users reusing a password, or users choosing a weak password or easily guessed, or companies not employing a brute force detection controls, or they're not doing other risk assessments in terms of like where they're coming from, or devices and all that kind of stuff. And you actually see it for this scenario. Absolutely, if you implement MFA, you're going to cut off nearly all of those attack vectors. And this is what I mean. It's so important to go for the root, rather than saying, well, we need to give our users password managers, and we need to ensure that we have monitoring controls, and we need to have risk assessment. Hey, no, let's just implement this one control that will address the majority. And I think this is where that risk assessment really comes in handy. Similarly, like, it's like user awareness. It's one of those one controls that can cover a broad range of attack vectors, whether it be phishing, whether on email, whether it be a phone call, whether it be someone taking a photo of their screen and sharing it on social media. You can't really do a technical control for that specific thing, but yeah, you can tell people don't do it, but then see where the gaps are and fill the rest. So that's where I think, like, my opinion, I think it's like information security is this big, but we make it that big. And there are always going to be fringe cases, but I think for the majority, we can implement a few select controls relevant to that environment, relevant to the risks. And this is where I go back to collecting local threat intel is so important. Find out what's actually relevant to your company, in your business, in your model, because otherwise you're going to be chasing, oh, well, so-and-so company based in Asia said, this is the big threat, so I'm going to implement it.
Exactly. And you said something very, very good, which goes with what Mr. Jerry Bell, our InfoSec Llama, said on his talk on Wednesday, right? You got to go to basics. You always have to go back to basics. No reason to do anything other than that. I like one of your quotes here in one of your slides, how to be more effective defenders, to be confident even when breached. Stephen Moore from Exabeam, who was the CISO at Anthem during the Anthem breach, he said it just like that. You're not going to be judged by the breach itself. You're going to be judged by how you communicate, how you react to it, right? And if you take everything negative, you're not going to learn from it. And the Ellis on his presentation, pre-mortem, post-mortem, right? You tried to do it, it didn't work. Now we learn from that. So always be very confident when breached. I mean, is that something philosophy that you really follow?
It is, yeah. No, I think transparency is key, and especially in this day and age when a breach occurs and it very quickly gets amplified across social media. And so people want answers quickly, and they don't want all the answers. They just want you to share what you know. And I think one of the best recent examples was the Twitter breach.
Yeah.
They got breached, but if you follow the timeline of the Twitter help account, it was so on the ball. Within 3 hours, they went from we're aware of an incident to saying these are the steps we're taking, this is why we're taking them. And it takes guts, to come out with, because you're basically saying, we think we're doing the right thing. It might not be the right thing, but here's our reasoning behind it. So bear with us. We'll give back control once we're confident that we can give them back to you securely.
Yeah, so, and one of the things that I noticed that all that it accomplished is stopped a lot of people from making comments based on assumptions on what they think they know. And there wasn't a lot of drama about it. It's like everyone was just, okay, what's next? When are they going to come with what they find? And then people started talking based on what they were receiving as facts. So that helped. Your slide, I thought it was pretty good. What are your top root causes? Is is that is that list? How many are there? 5, 10. Is that from any report? Is that relation from the 100 reports that you read for all of us and just summarized it in this one slide?
No.
Hey, hello there, baby.
Yeah, little man. Great. We always love cameo appearances.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So the question was those 10
No,
root causes.
that's a list that's my colleague Roger Grimes he came up with, because he coined he written a book about the data-driven defense. So that's where some of those concepts I borrowed from him. He's convinced me that those are the 10. We went back and forth quite a bit around, maybe there are others, maybe there are less, and I'm sure it's not going to be a perfect list of 10. I'm not saying that's the only, but I think from what we can analyze, that's probably, that'll cover the majority of your things. So if you implement controls that can cover those 10 root causes, you're pretty much covered for majority of your things.
Yeah, and the other one that I like, the data-driven defense planning cycle. Is that also? I mean,
That again is taken in part from Roger's study on this, and he's written a book. I recommend the book. It's like a data-driven defense strategy, and it's and I think like anything, it's just a cycle. I mean, in security, we love our cycles, don't we? Yeah. Because it means we can keep on making money because nothing ever ends. We're never complete. Yeah. But it's great in the way that it just helps to formalize the steps that you have to go through. Again, it's a very high level. There's things in there like define your metrics and report on them. On a diagram like that, it looks really simple, but anyone that actually tries to go in and try to start defining metrics and measuring them, that in itself is a large thing. So it's a very high level simplified view of the whole cycle, but I think it's a good starting point for any organization wanting to look down that route. Okay.
In one of your last slides before I abruptly cut you off there, it says, who takes security seriously? And that's a very important question. That's a question that I believe a lot of departments, security departments, should be asking constantly. Reassess, make sure that they still have that passion, they still understand, and bring in, bring in the right people, make sure that they understand. So who takes security seriously? You have I do, you do, the CISO, the auditors. Somebody has to. What should be the right answer?
This is the hard one, isn't it? It's like we love, as I use we as a broad statement, but when a breach occurs, a lot of people like to point the finger at the CISO or the security department, implying that they're the ones, it's their responsibility. So because they didn't take security seriously enough, this breach occurred. And I don't think that's entirely fair all the time. Sometimes they want to try and implement something, but it's not accepted within the business. Maybe it's a different executive, maybe it's delays in implementation, maybe it's all these other constraints that we have. So I think it is something that it's driven from the security team because that's their discipline, but then it's pushed through as a culture to ensure that everybody, and I'm not at all suggesting that everyone needs to be a security expert, but everyone is on board with that cultural aspect that that we want to be secure. So, when we get in the car and we drive, we want us, and we want by virtue our passengers, and we want other people on the road to be safe. We don't want anyone to get hurt because of us, and we don't want to get hurt because of other people. So we come upon these agreed rules of the road. We put our faith in the engineers who build the car to make them safe. And so it's kind of like this broad area of responsibility that gets shared out, and it becomes a culture that we don't even think about. It's just inherently built in to it. And some of this comes from role models. So execs at the top, they exhibit those behaviors. So if I put my seatbelt in the car, my children see me doing that, and they just copy me instinctively. So even my youngest, he'll get in the car and he'll be like, put my seatbelt on. because he sees me and my wife doing it, or his older brothers and sisters doing, so he knows that that's something that he needs to do.
Yeah.
Similar in the organization, so there's that role modeling, and then there's also culture carrying around as well. Like, you know, some people, they influence others in positive ways. I think one thing that is, one of my colleagues, Perry, he says, he goes, what people do is more important than what they know. And sometimes as security professionals, we're obsessed with providing information to people to get them to understand, oh, this is why you shouldn't let someone tailgate you in, or this is why you shouldn't do X, Y, and Z. This is what, and that's kind of like secondary. The primary thing is like, well, how do we get them to adopt better behaviors? And, you know, as long as they're doing the right thing, then it doesn't matter whether they fully understand it. And a lot of that, I think, should be delivered through the technology platforms themselves. They should be architected in a way that it makes it difficult for someone to do the wrong thing. And then you've only left with a small portion, which is like, you can't address with technology. And for that, you can educate the people. But then that becomes quite an easy task to do.
And that aligns with Wendy Nather's message from her presentation about how to just make security almost like, you know, not important because it's already part of the whole process. It's included and we don't have to worry about it much. And then just educate on the proper use of the technology. What's next for Javvad now at No B4?
What's next? I don't know. Every day is different. It's the COVID has really thrown everything for a loop. But it's, but yeah, I'm always looking for my next kind of like research project to get my teeth stuck into. So I am working on something with one of my colleagues, but it's in very, very early phases at the moment. So watch this space, I suppose. Hopefully we'll wait for next year when I can come to Colombia and present there in person.
Yeah, of course. Very welcome to Colombia again, please.
Yeah, we're itching to go. Unfortunately, like everything else, it's kaput. All plans are over this time. But Javvad, again, it was a pleasure, my friend. It's a real honor having you here. I appreciate your time. As I said before, very difficult to laugh in silence when I listen to you. So it was fantastic. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you and everything the whole conference does. Put on a great event, and honored that you invite me back again. Second time, you didn't learn your lesson the first time. And keep up the good work. And it's a pleasure to meet you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Javvad.
See you later. Salma.